What's up, everybody? I hope that George enjoys his theme song. So you want to get right to the core. So you want to know what it's all for. So you want to come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip. The podcast by George. So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip. The podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George. He knows what he's fighting for. It's podcast by George. Podcast by George. Want to know what we're fighting for?
That always makes me smile. I love that. That's the great Ron Placone that you've seen on Podcast by George. He's a comedian. He's an activist. He's a commentator. He's all over the internet. And right now he's traveling the northwestern part of the United States. If you want to get tickets to his comedy act, go to ronplacone.com. Search him out on the web. If you're in that part of the world, you won't be disappointed. Thanks again to Ron Placone. That makes me giggle every time that it comes on. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today, folks? We're going to be talking about a new book, and it's going to dovetail. It's going to segue, as I like to say, harkens back to my days as a DJ. It's going to segue out of the news of the day and coming back on Podcast by George, one of my favorites. And I've heard from some viewers that also consider this guy to be one of their favorites because he's a wordsmith. He's a guy that can paint a word picture. And he's just done this in a new book entitled, here it is, entitled Thirst. This is what it looks like. I've got this copy. Man, I went through this thing in just a few hours. It is a page turner. It's a great book entitled Thirst. But for folks that may not know, Nicholas Powers, he's an author. He was best known prior to this book anyway for being the author of Ground Below Zero, 9/11 to Burning Man. He's an associate professor of English at the State University of New York, Old Westbury. And he's been writing for Truth Out since 2011. He's in the Independent. You'll see his articles popping up on the web. His article, Killing the Future, The Theft of Black Life, in the Truth Out anthology, Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect, coalesces his years of reporting on police brutality. And that's also an element of thirst. We might talk about that briefly here as we get going. The complete title of this now, and this is important, it's Thirst, the Rich Are Vampires. Now, this book, folks, it's as spooky as it is bone-chilling realistic. You got to read between the lines a little bit. And when you do, you'll understand that the oligarchy, they're coming for all of us with a thirst that cannot be quenched. It's how they thrive and they survive. I mean, it is something else. We're going to be talking about all of that. Let's take down his live line and bring in the real deal. Let's bring him on the show. Folks, this is Nicholas Power. How you doing out there in NYC, Nick?
It is so good to see you, George. Thank you.
It's been a while. It's been a while. It has indeed. And I know you'd been working on that book and it's been released now. I want to show some things on screen about where you can get it and what some of the early reviews are on it. We're going to start off. I'm going to take a spin through this, and I know you like to comment on things. Obviously, you're a commenter on news, national, domestic and foreign. And I have these little segments that I have been starting to, because I just can't not do it, called What in the Hell? Let me bring this up on screen, Nick, and you can jump in here. And we're going to talk about thirst, so everybody stand by. So let's get this up on screen here and see if I can get a look at this slide here. Why is that not coming up? I didn't want to bring Nick in like that. Let's see. It should come up here. Here we go. Here it is. So this is out of the Associated Press, and people know that I've been covering Shireen Abu Akleh's tragic killing, murder in Palestine, and the world's inaction on this. And this is just the latest. This is from the Associated Press. Slain journalist family, no help from the U.S. for a full probe. And bring this up on screen so I can see it a little bigger here. A relative of slain Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh said Wednesday that the Biden administration's top diplomat refused her face-to-face appeal to push for a full U.S. investigation into the killing of the veteran television correspondent. niece, Lena Abu Akla, also said Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and U.S. officials declined in meetings with her this week to provide any more information than they had already made public about how Americans reached the findings about the killing they released last month. So they came out with a very short summary of their findings. They want to know the details. Why not? Well, no, we're not going to show those to you. A July 4th statement issued by the State Department concluded that Israeli forces likely fired the shot that killed Shireen Abu Akleh in May, but there was no indication Israelis intentionally shot the veteran Al Jazeera correspondent. That's what they said. But as folks saw on my podcast, the great Chris Hedges, a war correspondent, New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning author, has determined that this shot came in just below her helmet line, just above her flak jacket. It was placed by a sniper. It was not an accident. It was by design. And that's why they want to know the details. The 51-year-old reporter, an American citizen. I just want to state this is an American citizen. Okay, what the hell difference does that make? I mean, we're all people on this planet. But my God, you think the United States would be taking a lead in this, and you would think that American journalists in particular would be taking a lead in this, because this was one of the world's most renowned journalists on the Middle East crisis, the Israeli-Palestine crisis, and an American citizen, and we sit on our hands, we sit silently. She was highly respected in the Arab world for her decades covering Palestinians and other Arab communities. It felt like we left the meeting with more questions, and our questions were still not answered. Her 27-year-old niece told the Associated Press in an interview Wednesday at the Capitol, where she pressed lawmakers for helping obtain more answers. State Department spokesman Ned Price did not immediately address questions. Ned Price, my God, from the AP about the niece's account of her discussion Tuesday with Blinken. Price referred instead Wednesday to his earlier remarks to reporters that Blinken was meeting with Shireen Abu Akleh's family to express a message of condolence and a message of the priority we attach to accountability going forward, as well as to hear from her survivors. Okay, so I don't know. I'm going to bring that down, and I want to, and I particularly wanted to talk about this with Nick, because Nick's a journalist. I mean, he's out there writing his works, appear in Truth Out, The Independent. I think his stuff's been on Democracy Now! I mean, he understands the importance of protecting these journalists. And my God, if we can't keep them alive, the very least we can do, Nick, is to reveal the entire story, to tell the truth, which is what her life was devoted to, telling the truth when she's shot and killed by a sniper.
Systems of power that rely on violence need always to kill the truth tellers. And the attack on, I am a journalist, and many of my friends are journalists, and they do investigative reporting where they look deep into the bowels of a multinational corporation. They take a look at labor laws, and they take a look at the violence that's happening at the borders. And journalists at our best go to the places where people are hopeless and helpless and try to bear witness to the violence that they are not barely surviving, or that they are dying of. And so when this journalist from Al Jazeera was killed, she is one in a long line of journalists being killed around the world, whether it's the cartels in Mexico killing the journalist, or even the government, the state. You see this here, obviously an Israeli sniper getting a bullet right at the most kind of vulnerable part between the armor and flak jacket, her helmet and flak jacket. You see journalists getting killed in the Ukraine. And so whenever journalists are trying to bear witness to the violence being done to helpless people, they also are putting themselves, in the line. Now, in this specific case, I think what's important is that the new generation of American Jews, the younger ones, are more comfortable being critical of Israel. That wasn't the case in generations before. One, because of the shadow of the Holocaust that was still hanging over. Israel was a new state. There was constant wars. And so there was a really deep loyalty to Israel. But over the decades, there has been so many news reports, so many testimonials of the oppression that Palestinians face, the occupation that they live under, and just even in my own personal life, talking to Israelis, that I've met quite a number of Israelis who actually have left the nation because they said, I remember one guy in particular, he said that he didn't like, he was in the military. He said he didn't like what the brutality he was asked to do was doing to him, that it was actually warping his soul.
Yes.
And
moral injury. Yeah,
moral
Matthew
injury.
Hoden. Yes.
And we were talking, thousands of miles away from Israel, and I think that distance, it was at Burning Man. We were in the desert talking, and he just felt open enough to really tell me how he felt. And then I remember, this is just another anecdote. I remember there was an Israeli couple, and the guy showed me this deep scar because he had got shot while he was found, I think, fighting with the Palestinian Authority or somebody. He got hit by a bullet, and he and his wife. We had a big van, and we took the clippings of the different nations and we rearranged them on the van. And I remember when he kind of took a scissors and took out Israel, and he actually put it like right next to Jamaica and Trinidad. And I was like, why are you putting it in the Caribbean? He's just like, I just want us to be out. I just want us to be in a different place.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that, as a journalist, you're looking at the most helpless, and you're trying to give a voice to their voice to the larger world. Your job is to be a megaphone. And I think, what I just did is tell you two anecdotes. I think as an author, as a literary man, a man of letters, there's also these other side stories that don't kind of are not on the conveyor belt of journalism. But when I just told you those two stories about Israelis who left Israel because they were disgusted by what the culture was doing to them, that they wanted to leave. So the thing, and this kind of goes back to what Martin Luther King said about racism, and you can apply it here to the anger and the rage happening in Israel, Palestine. And he said that racism affects both the racist and the victim of the racism.
Yeah.
It's like being in jail. It's like the warden is in jail with you, and that the racist is suffering as well. And so what you see here, again, just through a couple of anecdotes, is that that these systems of violence rely on silence. And what the job of the journalist or the job of an author, an essayist, or a poet, or a singer-songwriter, or a rapper, is to try to take your microphone, and stick it into the places where there's bombs falling, there's bullets flying, like in the Ukraine, and try to get those voices out there so that it touches the humanity of the world, and the world can start putting pressure to make it right.
Well, thanks for sharing those stories. God, I'm still hopeful. I keep my toes and fingers crossed every day, hoping that these kind of stories can make a change. Let me finish this story because there's a couple of things here that I wanted to get to in this, and this is just the last page of it. Now, Abu Akla was shot and killed while covering an Israeli military raid on May 11th in the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. You read through these articles, this is just poor. That jumps out at me every time I see this. She was shot and killed while covering an Israeli military raid in a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. Well, what the hell are they doing conducting a military raid in a refugee camp? And how in the hell does a journalist get shot like I described during that raid? Palestinian eyewitnesses, including her crew, say Israeli troops killed her and that there were no militants in the immediate vicinity or any exchange of fire at the time she was shot. Israel denies its forces deliberately targeted her, but says an Israeli soldier may have hit her by mistake during an exchange of fire with a militant. And Chris Hedges, again, he basically says they don't make mistakes, folks. U.S. lawmakers and Abu Akla's family pressed the Biden administration to push for more of an accounting in the killing of a U.S. citizen. And there she is. That's the great Shireen Abu Akla, God rest her soul. Not only that, they attacked her funeral, afterwards. I mean, this was not by accident. This was by design. That Ned Price guy that I talked about, I know that you're aware of him, Nick. That guy spent 10 years in the CIA. He's now our State Department spokesman, weighing in on issues like this each and every day. You can tune him in on your nightly news, on your talking head cable news programs. The guy is everywhere. He's with the CIA. I love to play this. I know Nick's probably seen this film clip, but again, you're wondering about getting your information from somebody like Ned Price. Let me play you this clip of a guy that was the head of the CIA, and people will recognize him. His name is Mike Pompeo.
When I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
My God, the glory of the American experiment. Every time I see that clip end with that, I see that pant load up there. I think maybe the only time they ever told the truth was when he was making that remark. And again, these are the kind of people that we're getting our news from. These are the people that are feeding these news programs that you're watching, and who is quoted in this AP article. And every time that Ned Price is quoted pontificating on anything around the world, that should be, one of these parentheses disclaimers or something like, this guy is CIA. He worked there for over 10 years, and now he's telling us how to view the world, Nick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's the morality where the ends justify the means. And so that's exactly what he was describing, that whatever ends they were trying to achieve, that it justified the means of lying, the means of stealing, the means of murder. And then what you see there, more importantly for me, is that people long to tell the truth, but they want to tell the truth in a way that doesn't cost them anything. So, when you do something, like you achieve a goal, you lie, you steal, you maybe murder for a larger goal. And in general, people, you want to tell other people what's going on, what's happening, but you can't, because it's going to get you in trouble. And so finally, when people know that they have a carte blanche, that they have a pardon, that they're not going to get in trouble, and that they're in a comfortable audience that already agrees with them. Yeah. Then you get those moments where he says, we did training courses on lying, cheating, and stealing. And he didn't say murder, because that's probably crossing a line. But do you see that he's in a comfortable audience? He knows he's protected by status and power. And so he can go ahead and say what other people have already, that's the quiet part, out loud.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and it's difficult, because the larger news organizations have a great reach, and so they can get cameras, they can get microphones out to places that small news organizations can't. But then the price is that, oftentimes with that money comes a reliance on corporations and politicians and big pocketed donors, and they all have vested interest. And so there's kind of this inverse relationship where the more infrastructure you have for your news media organization, and the more it's financed, the more it's resourced, the more you're in the pocket of vested interest, which means that even though you're getting more material, it's getting filtered through an ideological lens, so that by the time the reader or the audience or the listener gets it, the reality has been so distorted, even though the technology is so superb. And then, you have the other side where you have smaller organizations which aren't in the deep pockets of a corporation through advertising or politicians or et cetera. And, and so sometimes that ideological lens is less, but, sometimes it's more. You have things like Alex Jones and others, which are yeah. It's a dicey field. And I will end by saying that we're in a very kind of slightly absurd situation. Yes, where we have an amazing amount of media infrastructure that's wrapped around the face of the planet, And we have also probably some of the lowest trust in media in decades. And, that's not a healthy situation, because if people don't trust media, and I'm not saying that they should unless the media is trustworthy, but if they don't trust the media, then they're going to be basically left to their own devices to try to figure out what the world is. And I think that's good when you're walking in your street or in your neighborhood. But in the end, this is a giant planet, 8 billion people on it. And you need to hear the stories of other people to make sense of your own life. And how can you do that if you don't have media?
That's great. And everything you just said is I talked at the top of the show about a segue.
Yeah.
Okay, let's segue to this next story. And then this is going to segue into thirst, folks. So watch this. So here we go. AR-15 style guns sold as a sign of manhood as the shooting rampages continue in the United States. This is from the Associated Press just today. I saw this. From Washington, D.C., Dateline AP. Gun makers have taken in more than $1 billion from selling AR-15 style guns over the past decade. 10 years, folks, $1 billion. At times, marketing them as a way for young men to prove their masculinity, even as the number of mass shootings increases. According to a House investigation unveiled Wednesday. I saw that. What? Okay, so the weapons have been used in massacres that have horrified the nation near and far, from the neighborhood of Nicholas Powers to the neighborhood of Podcast by George, folks. We've got this horrific killing in Iowa, Nick, a family of 4 gunned down in a state park. Well, 3 of them killed anyway. The young boy managed to survive somehow, including that one that left 10 people dead up there in Buffalo, and another 19 kids and 2 teachers. My God, I just love that. My God, the shot to death in Uvalde, Texas. We covered that. The Committee on Oversight and Reform said some ads mimic popular first-person shooter video games. Now, I did not know that because I don't see these ads, folks. But they're saying, because people talk about the influence of video games, I'm kind of undecided about that. But there must be something to it because they're mimicking them to sell these weapons. And folks, when you walk around your neighborhood here in the heartland, I don't know if it's true in New York City, Nick, but it's almost like a science fiction movie at night compared to when I grew up. Where are the kids? Who the hell took all the kids? Where are they? Why are they not out on the streets at night? Well, a lot of them, particularly the teenage males, are watching these damn video games. So I don't know. They tout the weapon's military pedigree, while others claim the guns will put buyers at the top of the testosterone food chain. Those sales tactics are deeply disturbing, exploitive, and reckless, said Democratic Representative Carolyn Maloney. Now, Nick would know about Carolyn Maloney because she's out of New York. In short, the gun industry is profiting off the blood of innocent Americans. Okay, folks, getting close to thirst here. I mean, this is the fundamental, the framework that we're talking about for this book that Nick authored. And so let's talk about the blood. Let's talk about thirsting for the blood of Americans. This is what I'm identifying as gun lobby vampires. This is from Brady.org. And we had the great Joe Gorton on here not too long ago talking about his organization. The number one person taking more money than anyone else, I did not know this, Mitt Romney.
Wow.
Yeah, boring ass Mitt Romney. It takes more money than anybody else. These other guys, Richard Burr, Roy Blunt, Tom Tillis. Yeah, I could understand that. By the way, Tillis is the Republican in North Carolina that Matthew Ho, who's been on my show, was just on last week, is hoping to have an opportunity to get a platform to be able to get on a debate stage with the Green Party, which would be very interesting. Okay, this list continues. We're not moving down that far, folks. This is just another page. Marco Rubio. Yeah, $3 million from the NRA, from the gun lobby. And then here in the heartland, waving that flag, boy, the veteran Joni Ernst, the alligator wrestler from western Iowa that has ridden a motorcycle and carried a gun in public since she took office. Over $3 million. Then Rob Portman, Todd C. Young. Let's keep moving down this list. The amounts are declining, but it's still significant. Josh Hawley, look at him on the list. Remember the last time you saw him? Mm-hmm. He was running through the Capitol building like Barney Fife. He didn't look like John Wayne to me. I mean, that's Josh Hawley, folks. He took $1.4 million. There's your turtle head, Mitch McDonald, the most wealthy person in the Congress. This guy has more money, and he gets $1.3 million from the gun lobby. And I'm moving down here. This is the last slide now, and it's Chuck Grassley. Now, he's only taken $226,000, but in the world of politics, that's still significant money for a guy that probably hasn't had a gun since he had a BB gun or something in childhood. I wouldn't trust Chuck Grassley with a gun. My God, he wouldn't have any fingers or toes left. So I don't know what that's all about other than the money, obviously. So that's what we're talking about. And that takes us to thirst, the vampires that are sucking the blood from us all. That's just one example of the dynamic, the fundamental of this great new book that Nick has authored. And I'm going to bring this up on screen here, and read from this. This is out of The Independent. Nicholas Powers introduces us to the world that is a more truthful version of our own reality. Vampires conspire to get a real estate mogul named Ronald Balk to be elected president in order to start a nuclear war. Why? Well, the vampires want to be free of their addiction to human beings. But Maz, an Afro-Latina, hears them and has to find a way to stop them and Balk before he gets to the White House. Taking a page from the late, great Bob Marley and Karl Marx, we see how vampires are a literary trope that makes them visible, the surplus profit extraction of the ruling class. That's when you see them, folks. They thirst, and our lives are what they drink. And this is from Barnes & Noble. This is how it's described there. Vampires are symbols of the ruling class. In Karl Marx's Capital and Bob Marley's Babylon System, they make visible the extraction of surplus value. The new novel Thirst by writer-activist Nicholas Powers renews the vampire genre by placing politics, race, and resistance to fascism at its heart with a stake driven right through it. Ah, my God. That's great stuff. So let me take this down from the screen here and get this full screen out of here. Yeah, that's great stuff. So I want you to talk about the book. I've talked a lot here this morning. I got to tell you, when I started to look at this, the reason that it struck me, I'm going to just start this way. I'm not a zombie guy. I don't watch zombie movies. I saw World War Z that came out about 10 years ago. In some ways, people think that that's a zombie movie. It's really a virus movie, and it was before the pandemic. And that thing laid me low when I saw that movie. My God. And again, it's because I was not a connoisseur of the genre. Okay, so fast forward here to Thirst. I don't read vampire books. I don't even look at vampire movies, Nick. And when I was reading this thing, again, I was laid low because all of this stuff is new to me. And I think even for people that follow vampire movies and books and stuff like this is really unique because of the contextualization that you put in here.
Thank you. I wanted to return the vampire novel to its roots, where it was in Eastern European folklore. It was in some ways a kind of a critique of the nobility, the critique of the landowners. And so vampires sucking the blood of the peasants was a metaphor for the wealthy sucking up the labor, the money, the life energy of the peasants. And so I wanted to use that, a kind of earlier idea of vampires, and kind of leapfrog over the Twilight series and some of the kind of YA fiction, where vampires have become a kind of a literary terrain where a character can undergo kind of an erotic kind of maturation, where it's usually kind of questions of eroticism, of bodily integrity, of sexuality, of coming to age, or rites of passage. So you see this obviously most clearly in Twilight, where the main character Bella, kind of goes from being a girl to a woman through this relationship with Edward the vampire. And what I felt when I was writing this was that I wanted to, again, create a character. This time it was an Afro-Latina, just almost out of high school. And her name would be Maz. And her character came to me in daydreams, just when you're walking around and you're just kind of daydreaming about a story or an idea, or fantasizing, or even sometimes in dreams at night. And bit by bit, she came to me. And what I heard her personality was a young woman who was an unwilling journalist, so to speak, of the telepathy between vampires. And she was realizing that she was not actually a schizophrenic. She thought that she was schizophrenic. She thought that she was hearing voices, and she was taking medicine to stop hearing voices. And she begins to turn a corner and realize that those voices she heard were actually vampires conspiring to start a nuclear war.
My God.
The reason the vampires wanted to start a nuclear war was very simple, that they feed off of human energy, most really like depression and sorrow. When human beings are weak, they feed off their energy. But the vampires absolutely hate being addicted and dependent upon human beings. They wanted to be free of us. And the one way that they could achieve it was if the whole world was blanketed in energy and radiation. Then they could actually live free of human beings, because the energy, the radiation would just be in the air. They could just live off of that.
My God. Oh, let me stop you here, because it reminds me of reading the book. I gotta ask Nick about this. So okay, the book opens in Puerto Rico, and I read, and you've got this connection with Puerto Rico, and I thought, well, is this self-indulgence on the part of Nick because of that, or something more?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of both. I mean, most authors are usually giving themselves I would say, an self-indulgence for an author is usually a path towards a deeper truth. Because you're indulging in something that you find pleasurable, and you oftentimes it's pleasurable because it's something you haven't talked about before, or explored before, or allowed yourself to express, and it feels great when it comes out. So I think sometimes self-indulgence is a path towards the real truth of a story. And yeah, there it is.
I love it's great. Got great artwork and graphics and stuff.
I know she did great.
Yeah.
She is just top notch, and she really fell in love with the book. And but I started in Puerto Rico because I wanted to establish a connection between the vampires and how they prey upon people. I wanted to start off with a young girl who then eventually becomes the mother later on in the book. And I wanted to set the tone of focusing on women characters.
Yes. The
main reason I focused on women characters is that I wanted to have a woman character go through transformation that was not about love or sexuality or romance. Because, whether it's, again, YA, young adult novels, urban fiction, romance, Harlequin novels, that one of the main ways in which women are allowed to see themselves becoming mature is oftentimes through a romantic or sexual relationship. And what I wanted to do was to change that, to show a woman becoming mature through accepting herself, accepting what she thought was a sickness or a weakness about her. And then she turns it around, and it turns that her weakness was actually the source, unknown yet, the source of her greatest strength.
Okay, so I've got these questions as I went through the book. And I wanted to ask you about that female protagonist element. I think you covered that. A couple of things that you mentioned just very briefly. This issue with pharma has a role throughout the book with Maz. And then the other thing I want to emphasize for people that might be thinking about picking up a copy about this book. It underlying between the lines is the political part of it. It really outwardly appears to be a vampire book. I mean, as you're reading through the thing, and the point that I want to make to people is this is not your grandparents' vampire book. I was reading this, Nick, and I thought, boy, this is really weird. It's really creepy. It's really strange. And the thing I like about that is we don't need to appeal to our grandparents any longer. That generation is past. I don't know if they ever had the reins. If they have, they've completely, thrown them overboard. I mean, they're not running things the way that they should. It's the young people that we're going to have to rely on. This book reaches out to them in this vampire genre, it's really for that type of audience, I think.
You know, you're right. I teach college, and when I even teach outside of the college, it's usually a younger audience. And so I'm, by profession, my antenna, my emotional antenna, are always attuned towards the youth because that's who I teach. And so I hear how the youth narrate their lives, actually, because I teach creative nonfiction and I have them write 30-page autobiographies. So I actually, you know, over the past probably 10 years of teaching, I've done that class and I've delved really deep in their autobiographies, you know, helped them correct it and structure it. And so I've gotten incredibly in-depth microscopic focus on what youth are dealing with now. And so when I'm writing this book, I think about, you know, what are the questions they have? What are the turmoils in their heart? What are the confusions that are buzzing in their heads? And so when I wrote this, I know that one of the things that youth are dealing with now is being overprescribed drugs.
Yes.
And so, you know, if they have pain in their hearts, or if they're having mental illness, that is in part not because of a chemical imbalance in their head, but because, you know, they're under a lot of stress, they're depressed, but they're given a pill. And so the character Maz is given a pill. And then she's in the high school where a lot of people are getting pills. And she even describes how there's what she would call blackout parties, where the kids would get together and throw all of their different medicines, and they would just grab a bunch and fist them down and, you know, chase it down with the thing of liquor.
Now, that's not just literary, that's reality.
That's the thing, is that I literally got that from a student's autobiography. You know, like they literally said that in Long Island, they had blackout parties where kids would just bring in all their stuff, you know? And I thought that was, you know, I told her, don't do it, you know? And I said, you know, you should tell your friends not to do it. But more than that, it's afterwards, it just struck me as what a desperate maneuver for kids, in a sense, to be so angry that they're being prescribed medicines that don't really heal their hurt, don't really heal their pain, to the point where they're just kind of just using them again as escapes.
I mean, yeah. I hate to interrupt, but I have all these questions because I just love this book. Okay, so the reality element of this is throughout the book, interwoven politics and vampires, reality versus the most fantastic shit that you've ever read in your life, folks. I mean, things that you've never thought about. And we talked about the pharma, the reality. How about the broken educational system, and in particular, what happens to Maz in this book? And again, this is reality in a great literary way. The bullying that Maz endures. Now, again, you're a professor at a university. I mean, you're working with college kids, but you read this and you think, oh, hell, that could never happen. Yeah. I think that does happen. Yeah,
it does. I've guest lectured at high schools. I've talked to students. I mean, these are college kids. So when they were giving me their autobiography, I'm hearing stories about incredible violence, sexual violence, physical abuse, mental abuse that happens at a high school and middle school level. And they're writing about this in the autobiography, or they're telling me about this. And again, I always tell them, please, you have to get some help for this. But it gives me a window into what kids are dealing with. So there are scenes of bullying that Maz undergoes, and other kids in her high school deal with. And, you know, I wanted to make it realistic that in a broken down education, in a broken down school, where the teachers are checked out and the kids are just kind of on the loose, and they're also bringing with them a lot of anger and rage from their homes, that they're going to take it out on each other. And that the hallways no longer become a pathway from one classroom to the other, but it just almost becomes like a hunting ground. And so Maz definitely deals with a lot of violence, and her other, friends at the high school deal with a lot of bullying. And that's one of the elements. So it's big pharma is in there. Bullying is in there.
Well, and like I mentioned, the political part of it, you'll get it. And as you get into it further, when I first started that, well, what is this, a pure vampire movie? Now you start to see the political things. You have this overarching capitalism type thing that hangs literally in the book above everyone. And then you've got this, result of it, this disease, basically, which is this bulk character, which is great because I'm an old baseball guy. I mean, that's easy for me to remember. You balk when you just start to read about this guy.
Yeah.
And it's done in a very entertaining, like in a page-turning way. And it's very modern and it's very well suited to this younger audience. I wanted to get back to that because what I was thinking when I read it, and I go back to my childhood. My God, we all had to read Moby Dick and Hemingway and all that kind of stuff. Well, it was kind of like that's the theater of the mind. When I read this book, Nick, I was like I was looking at a movie. I don't know how to describe that exactly, but it was like I was watching these events unfold as I read it, as opposed to playing them out in my mind. Now, I don't know if that's a writing technique or if you've ever considered that before, but that's definitely the way that I felt.
Yeah, when I was in college, I was a film major, and I grew up loving film and watching. And when I first began to read, I read comic books. So obviously, comic books, very big illustrations with dialogue, right? So, and then I did, kind of transition to like modern, novels. And so I love novels, but I was always a big film guy. And so the use of images in poetry and in film actually are very closely related, because you have to, in film, say a sharp message or create a mood for the audience in just a couple of images. And it's the same thing with a poem. And so I basically approached writing this almost as a kind of poetic film, and to try to show through very clear images both what's happening in the internal world, what's happening inside of them emotionally, but then connecting it with the image of the vampires, which is primarily shown, and this is as shadows. The vampires jump into darkness, and they're able to travel between shadows. So if they go into a shadow, say in Brooklyn, they can emerge out of a shadow in Upper Manhattan. They can travel through the shadow world. And they actually then, when they're traveling short distances, they travel as shadows, wherever there's darkness. They can just kind of travel along the street. So you see these silhouettes passing on walls, or the silhouettes trickling along the cobblestone. And I got that mostly from a couple of movies which were really helpful for that. Ghost, the Demi Moore, Patrick Swayze movie from the 90s. They had Whoopi Goldberg, and they had these kind of like shadow-like creatures taking the sinners to hell. I got that a little bit from Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker movie, where there was a lot of interesting use of shadows. In cinema, there's sometimes a really interesting things you can pluck from cinema and use that in a literary form.
Well, and again, he mentioned those two older movies, but folks, this is not your older movie, your older book. This is not your parents' vampire. This book will knock you on your ass. I mean, it really will. It is completely different. It is really strange. It is very engrossing. And then interwoven throughout the thing are these elements of today's modern reality that I talked about, along with this fantastical treatment as you move along through the thing. And before we lose you here, now there's a couple of other big elements in this book, the media, and then also law enforcement. If you could just touch on those somewhat, Nick, and I don't want to give away the whole book because I want people to.
No plots. I'm trying not to spoil anything.
Yeah, but those are big parts of this.
When you so today, a lot of us we began this show talking about the media and how frustrated we are by it, especially by its bias filters. And then, so what you see in the book is that Ronald Bulk, who is basically a regular human being, but he's a super rich real estate developer, wink, wink. And he's recruited by the vampires to run for president. And what he does is that the vampires give him just a little bit of their power, just a little bit of their telepathic ability. And he uses this in front of the cameras and microphones to tap into the common unconscious, the collective unconsciousness of the nation. And he uses it as a demagogue to try to whip up a lot of violence and rage against minorities and scapegoats so that this way he can rise to power. Okay, so that's the use of the media as an amplification for demagogues, which is something that we literally just lived through for the past 6 years until Trump was deplatformed. And finally, the other thing was law enforcement. is that I have, I would say he's a secondary character who does change, right? So he's a secondary character. He's not as important as Maz, but he's a law enforcement officer, Bouton, and he's in New York, and he winds up changing because at first he's kind of a rookie cop, and he discovers that there are vampires, and so he winds up joining Maz and her crew, and he's kind of like a defector from the NYPD, and he really helps them because he knows the vampires are real. But through his character, you go through the labyrinth, the maze of a police precinct. You go through the way cops twist the arms of suspects to make them confess to crimes that they didn't actually do. And this is obviously, harking back to the Central Park Five. And then finally, you see that even within, the police ranks, there are people who are questioning. There are people who are just following orders. There are people who are just cashing a paycheck. And there are also then people like Bouton, who once they realize the truth, they begin to try to work from the inside out. They basically defect from the command structure because they know that the police are basically enabling an incredible amount of destruction, and he doesn't want to be a part of it anymore. And that also is reality because, people are people, and you're going to see, within the police structure, a whole spectrum of attitude towards the system that go, all the way from being a loyalist to being someone to being a dissident. And so Bouton is a very kind of interesting character because I think he gives you a glimpse into the world of the NYPD.
Again, I don't want to give away the whole book because I do want people to buy it, obviously. Let me show this cover again so that people can look for it. You can get it on Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. I guess as we kind of wrap up here, Nick, and as we head towards the end of the book, again, a part of this that I think is a little bit more modern in the writing style is that we, back in my day, you expected everything to be tidy and all ends tied up by the end of the book and kind of walk away feeling good about everything. The end of the book is rather unsettling. Yeah.
You know what? I know we're gonna wrap up soon, and I'll answer that. But I just wanted to ask, how did you feel about the end of the book?
Well, again, I'm kind of old school, and I was hoping for, happy days are here again.
Yeah.
That's not necessary. But again, I was perfectly fine with that because the overall theme about this is you've got the fantasy of the vampires, and then you've got the reality of the real world. And at the end of it, I thought, well, this is reality, folks.
Yeah. So thank you. I won't give away the ending of the book. Let's just say that the ending comes at a great cost to Maz and her friends.
Yeah.
And physically, and what they look like, who survives. But then it sets in motion an incredible cataclysm that I won't give away, just say that you have to read it. But it just shows that a great change comes at a great cost. And that for those who initiate the change, who get everyone else awakened, that oftentimes they pay the greatest price because they have to put everything on the line to try to get other people to wake up. And I would just say that Maz at the end, I think Maz, I really truly I respect who she became at the end. I didn't know that that's who she was going to become. But when I see her grow into a full, mature woman who understood why the sacrifices had to be made, I kind of realized that it was no longer my book; it was her book. It really belonged to her at that point.
My God, I love that part about her character and kind of the storyline of Maz coming to you in a daydream. And I talk about music a lot on the show, obviously, and there's this Bob Marley influence that I talked about in this particular book. But I'm reminded of the great Paul McCartney and Hey Jude. I mean, he says that came to him in a dream, basically. I mean, he woke up and wrote that down. He can't write music, can't read music. I mean, he had to get up and write it down. And that's where that came from. So that's amazing to me. And you got to love Maz. You got to love following her exploits throughout the book. She's a victim in some respects. She's a protagonist in other respects. And I guess I would just leave it this way. Nick, after I got done finishing the book, I wanted to go out and buy a super soaker. Yeah, and the people, if you read the book, you'll find out why you might want to get one, because this is all too real when you read
Fill it with
thirst.
holy water.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'll hold it up one more time. I mean, this is just a wonderful book. We're gonna leave it there. We're out of time here. I like to hold these live lines to about where we're at, about 50 minutes to an hour or so. I want to give you last thoughts though, Nick, because again, you're the wordsmith, and my wife in particular loves the way that you end these shows when I have you on here. Kind of put a bow on this particular podcast by George live line.
Yeah, you and other people who've read the novel Thirst and have so far getting really good reviews, I think it's because it resonates to inside of them, not just that story, but it resonates with their story, that they have a story that they want to tell. And because they know me, and we talk so often, that it makes them think, well, where can I express my story at? I have daydreams, I have characters. And Sigmund Freud said something very astute, one of his many great quotes. He said that a fantasy is an unfulfilled part of our lives that we can finally achieve in fantasy, if not in reality. And I think part of what fiction does is it allows us to imagine, the unfulfilled desires that we have for change, and then to create a story in which that happens. But then here's the political relevance of it. When you create a story that compensates for the lack in real life, but you can have it in fantasy, if enough people start reading it and thinking it and believing it, then you can actually create that fantasy and make it real. And what is the history of our world if nothing but ideas that have been made real and old ideas cast to the side? So, read Thirst. I'd love for you to read it. I'd love to hear what people think. But more importantly, read your own dreams, read your own fantasies, read your own nightmares, and be brave about all three of them. And just realize that in those is probably the future of your own life.
That's great. The only thing I would say now, this is a setting in New York City. It reminded me of Lou Reed because his great album, New York, and he would be an excellent commenter on this. God rest his soul. He's no longer with us. But these issues that we've talked about, pharma, the educational system, law enforcement, war and peace, nuclear, this is all intrinsic to the heartland as well. I mean, we got one of the biggest pharma problems God ever created right here in the heartland as an example. And that's where we start with Maz. So folks, I mean, get a copy of this book, read it, and we'll get Nicholas Powers back on here sooner, hopefully, than later. And we'll follow up, talk about it here after it's been out for a while. Nick, as always, pal, thanks again for coming on Podcast by George.
Thank you. You're a good friend.
That's great. I mean, there's nothing better to be said than that. I just love having Nicholas Powers on Podcast by George. And folks, if you like Podcast by George, I want to show this now. This is I bring this up on screen once in a while, Nick. This is the website for podcastbygeorge.com. I encourage people, this red circle here that you see, those are the little icons, the thumbnails, where you can subscribe for free, and you can get Podcast by George in video, these live lines, in Facebook and YouTube, and then you can get them in audio and listen to Nicholas Powers and this great roundup of guests that I have just anywhere that you're out walking down the streets of New York City, riding your bicycle in the heartland, or commuting in downtown Detroit. I mean, that's where Podcast George lives. But I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to let it go. And we're going to talk again very soon, folks. But for right now, that's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.